Hey there, it's Lara here, back with another Witchy Wednesday weekly astrology forecast. This one's for the week of December 11th to the 17th, 2019. Thanks for being here. Welcome if this is your first time. I hope you stick around. And if what I have to say resonates with you, then please do come back and, and hit the subscribe button so that you know when I put other videos out. So we're going to focus on the full moon that's happening in Gemini, which is happening at 12:12 a.m., so just after midnight, December 12th, which is technically tomorrow, Thursday, and it's happening at 19 degrees Gemini. And that's the time I'm giving you, that's Eastern time, because that's my time zone. So if you are in a different area, then you can check on when that's happening for you. But so just after midnight tonight, technically, it would be tomorrow. But before I dive into talking about the moon and the full moon, I just want to mention, for those of you that are regular viewers, first of all, thank you so much. I'm using a microphone today, which I don't normally do. So you may notice a difference in the sound quality. And I kind of have a loud voice to begin with. So I'm concerned that this is going to be too loud or that it's going to pick up too much background noise. I've tested it and I'm on the fence. So I would like to know from you what you think. And if you would rather have me use the microphone or not use the microphone, or if it doesn't really matter either way. So if you'd leave me a comment below, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you. Like right now, for example, my furnace has kicked in when I started recording this. So, and I have a vent right behind me. And I'm hoping that that's not too loud for you. So those kinds of things, let me know. All right, so let's get back to the moon. The moon is currently in Gemini as I'm recording this, moving towards that full moon position at 19 degrees, right? Where the sun will be opposite the sky at 19 degrees. Full moon is always when the sun and the moon are opposing each other in the sky. That's what makes a full moon. So once we have that full moon, then the moon will transition into the sign of Cancer on Thursday. So lots of activity probably around the home front, a focus on our comfort zone, our family, our roots, our ancestry, our place of living, our emotional security kind of thing, our subconscious. And then the moon will move into Leo on Saturday. So if you have some kind of holiday festivities coming up, Saturday, Sunday, it's a good time for that. Should be a fun time. Hopefully nobody's being a diva under a Leo moon. That's potentially the downside, but it should be a good time. And we are actually heading out of town for a holiday party. Looking forward to that. And our kids are going to be involved in a holiday party with their cousins. They're excited about that. So good time for that. If you're interested, while I'm on the subject, in learning more about the moon, and I know some of you have heard me say this a lot in past videos, but I want to remind you, in case you've yet to do it, or in case it's your first time here, let you know, I have a free guide to working with the moon available on my website. Just have to head over there from the link below, and you can get it. And it's an audio, an MP3 audio, and an accompanying PDF. And so this can help you understand why it can be beneficial to get to know the moon and to work with her cycles. As humans, we are very connected to the moon cycles, especially women. We are, our ebbs and flows mirror hers, right? So it can be really supremely helpful to get in the know about what's going on with the moon and to start to relate to her in that way. And to understand, as the moon transitions into different zodiac signs, what that can be beneficial for, how we respond when the moon's in a particular sign, that kind of thing. So head over to my website and get that if you haven't done so already. In the new year, I plan on diving deeper into that subject in other ways. So stay tuned. But that's a really good foundation for you, that free guide. Other thing I want to mention is that Chiron stations direct at the time of the full moon. I focused on that in last week's video because I knew this week I wanted to focus on the full moon, but that video is very relevant still, and it will continue to be relevant because Chiron is in Aries until 2027. So this is a long haul transit that is impacting all of us. And so, if you haven't heard that video, it would be a good idea to find some time at some point and go have a listen to that. Air energy hasn't been a major focus for us for a while. We haven't had a lot of activity in the air signs. And so this full moon will pull that into focus for us. That air energy of, communication and thinking and logic and intellect and reasoning and decision-making, kind of what goes on up here, right? And in relation to that, so communications will be a big focus for this full moon. But there are a lot of other things going on at the time of this full moon that come into play. And I'm going to touch on all of those as I move forward here. And then, of course, go through all of the signs as well. So let's talk about Gemini energy in general. Gemini is a mutable air sign, right? So that energy of air that I just spoke about in an adaptable, changeable way. Gemini is the symbol of the twins, right? So it's this notion of paradox, of being split, of multiplicity. And so Gemini people with strong Gemini in their chart tend to be curious, intellectual, talkative, communicative, sociable. They can be, often found multitasking and doing a lot of things at once and paying attention to a lot of things at once. And so this kind of segues into what can be the kind of downside of that energy is split focus, split attention, losing important information because there's too much back and forth and flitting around. I think of this energy sometimes as a hummingbird, right? A hummingbird going from flower to flower, collecting the nectar, not staying in any one place for too long, not staying on anyone's subject for too long, that kind of thing. So, again, just to give you a little bit more detail on what the shadow side or the downside of that energy can be, it can look like being fickle, and it can look like being potentially insincere, ungrounded, maybe a bit scattered and not able to focus on any one thing for any length of time. It can look like anxiousness, right? Because it is an air sign ruled by Mercury, the planet of the mind and communications. And so there can be a lot going on up here, and that can cause kind of, thought spirals and this sense of being kind of up in the head and not feet on the ground sometimes. So that can happen. So, I think that sort of generally covers the energy as a whole. I will say also that, Mercury's in Sagittarius right now, right? Which is Gemini's opposite sign. Mercury, folks say, it was traditionally thought Mercury doesn't love being in Sagittarius because it is farthest away from its home sign of Gemini. But Mercury, or Sagittarius and Gemini are on the same axis. They both have to deal with the mind, ideas, learning, these kinds of things, right? Travel in a sense, but one is more long distance, Sagittarius, one is more sort of what happens closer to home. So there can be this kind of tension happening between these two energies, between, what's happening close community, close to home, that kind of thing. And then like the sort of more specifics of things, not the depth necessarily. Gemini is not necessarily known for depth, but is curious about the details and the information. Whereas Sagittarius is more about the big picture, the long view of things, the world view rather than the community kind of thing. So you see, they're similar, but they're like opposite sides of the same coin, right? And so with Mercury in Sagittarius right now, we can feel a little bit of this split focus perhaps, or trying to bring these two sides together, right? With this opposition. So full moons in general are culmination points. When something is blossoming fully, something's coming to perhaps a natural close or ending. Something is coming to light, being illuminated. There can be this leveling up at a full moon. There can be, it can be kind of a crisis point as well, where something comes to light and something needs to happen around that. There needs sometimes to be some release or letting go or purging in some way around the time of a full moon, right? When we have a full moon, like I mentioned, sun and moon opposite the sky. The sun is that energy of our conscious awareness, divine masculine, right? Whereas the moon is more what's going on underneath the surface, our unconscious, divine feminine. It's the energy of receptivity, divine feminine, versus more outward, going and getting it versus magnetizing it to yourself kind of thing, sun and moon. But with this, let's use the words conscious and unconscious. You no doubt are aware that around times of a full moon, people can be more emotional than usual, right? Our emotions tend to be heightened. And I see that as it's because those things buried under the surface, those unconscious, our emotions we're not always aware of. Like, where's that coming from? It's under the surface. Those things are bubbling to the surface to be illuminated, to be recognized, to be seen, to be dealt with. And so it's not a bad thing. It's a necessary thing. And the more awareness we have around that, the better off we'll be, right? Oh, this is coming up for me. Why am I feeling so charged, so emotionally charged about whatever this thing is that's going on, right? Or why is so-and-so somebody that, I'm in relationship with or friends with, or, I work with, or my children or whatever, why are these things, why are they being so emotional right now? Why are they triggered? And that's because there's something that that energy needs to come out. It needs to be purged. It needs to be dealt with and processed, right? So, I said to you, full moons are culmination points. And this particular full moon that's even emphasized further because it's the final full moon of the year of 2019. Final full moon, happening, before we reach eclipse season as well. And so that there's a real emphasis on a culmination point. It's the final full moon of the decade, in fact, right? We're moving into a whole new decade. So evaluate the last 10 years. What sort of cycle has gone on for you over these last 10 years, right? That is culminating in some way around the time of this full moon. The eclipses will also speak to that. And then to take it sort of the time frame down further, this full moon in Gemini is the culmination of something that began around 6 months ago, early June, around the time of the new moon in Gemini, right? So that's another cycle. Think about that time frame. And then more recently, it can be the culmination, the illumination, the release point, all those words I used before to describe a full moon, of something that was initiated or came into our awareness around the time of the most recent new moon in Sagittarius a couple of weeks ago. So you see how that works? So think about that, you know, and what's those cycles and what's been going on for you. This full moon, as I mentioned, it falls at 19 degrees Gemini. So if you have an emphasis at 19 degrees Gemini, right? So sun, moon, rising, other important points or collection, a cluster of planets, certain planets around that 19 degree mark, give or take 5 degrees, say, on either side of Gemini or the other mutable signs, which are Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces, then it's likely that you will feel this full moon a little more intensely. Now, that's not to say it's not impacting all of us, because it is. It's impacting all of us in some way, depending on what house it's falling in for you. And we're going to get to that in a bit. And how things are, you know, interacting in your own personal chart, which of course I won't know unless I look at your personal chart. You know, which I'd be happy to do if you want to connect with me that way. But excuse me. One thing I will say, well, there's lots of things I'm going to say, but more things I'm going to say, is that there may be a lot of things coming at us at once right now, a lot of things to think of, decisions to be made, conversations to be had, information coming in, that kind of thing. Don't be too impulsive. Don't scatter your energies, you know, as best you can. Take the time to process what's going on, process the information and the communications, and to integrate it, right? Before you make up your mind about something, before you decide on something. That's in part because at the time of this full moon and sort of all this week, we've got Neptune in a square to Jupiter. Yeah, Neptune squaring Jupiter. So Neptune in Pisces at 15, Neptune's at 15 degrees and Jupiter's at 19 degrees Sagittarius. So both mutable signs, right? So it's not an exact square, but it's close enough that we may be feeling a bit of this sense of fogginess around the details. It can also feel like exhaustion hits, you know, because we've been burning the candle at both ends and just been doing so much. So don't play into that by getting too frantic or all up in your head or trying to do too many things at once. You know, make your list, check it twice kind of thing. Do what needs doing to help you manage that and rest when you can. So there's that piece. The moon also, yeah, that's the piece I was also missing. Obviously, no, I just gave you the wrong information. I just told you Jupiter is squaring Neptune. And when I was looking at the chart, I'm thinking to myself, that's not right. It's the sun and the moon squaring Neptune, because they are at, the sun's at 19 degrees and the moon is at 19 degrees, right? So I had the degree right and the sign right, but I was talking about the wrong planet. Jupiter, or why do I keep wanting to say Jupiter? My goodness, because Jupiter's just moved into Capricorn. But Neptune at 15 degrees Pisces is squaring this full moon. So all those things that I just said to you about it, that's relevant. That's what I was talking about, but I kept saying Jupiter for some reason. The thing about this square, or Neptune in general, Neptune is squaring the full moon, yes, but it is in positive conversation with the energy in Capricorn, specifically with Saturn and Venus and Pluto that are all piled up there. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. So, and it's also trining Mars. Neptune is trining Mars, another kind of positive, supportive conversation, right? So a few words of advice around all of this. I already gave you some about making your list, checking it twice, you know, trying not to get overwhelmed, not being impulsive, getting all the facts, making sure you're clear on things before really jumping into anything or taking something as the word, you know, the facts. Is stay grounded, take action but focused action as best you can, right? Not like all over the place action. Like, okay, let me give you an example. If you're having a party, this is kind of relevant for this full moon energy. If you happen to be having a holiday party this weekend and you spend all your time dusting the baseboards, does that really matter? Is that really what people are going to notice? You've spent a solid day dusting the baseboards, but you haven't prepared any food for people to come. You see what I'm saying there? So it's kind of like focus on what's important, prioritize, and have faith that it will all work out. This is Neptune that we're talking about, right? Trust your intuition. If you're feeling a sense of confusion or not kind of knowing where to focus, trust your intuition. Don't make assumptions. Use your words, Gemini, right? And trust your instincts. Trust your intuition. So know that things may not necessarily be as they initially appear. Again, so not, really jumping into anything until you've got all the facts, and make sure that you're not really missing anything. Also, I would say, because this is air energy we're talking about with the full moon, don't necessarily believe everything you think. I'm sure you've heard that saying before, right? If you are getting all up in your head and frantic and worried about things, question yourself. Is this true? Is this really true? Or is this my, anxiety talking, for example? So let's get to that Venus, Saturn, Pluto thing that I just mentioned. First, I'm going to show you the chart before I talk about that piece. Here's the chart for the full moon. I'm sure people that are really into numerology would have some good insight about this 12-12-12 thing. The little that I do know, I believe 12, 12-12. 12 is also an energy of culmination. So that lends even further to this notion of culmination at this point, right, for this full moon. But getting back to the chart here. So there's the sun at 19 degrees of Sag. There is the moon at 19 degrees of Gemini, opposite the sky. There is, I mentioned Mars trining Neptune. Where's Neptune? Neptune, 15 degrees, Pisces. And then we've got all of the Capricorn energy with Pluto, Venus, and Saturn all stacked on top of each other. Venus sandwiched tightly between the big boys here, Saturn and Pluto, right? And then there's Jupiter in Capricorn at 2 degrees. And of course, the south node there as well. Mercury, right? Ruler of this full moon, sitting at 4 degrees Sagittarius. So, and then also I want to mention that we've got Uranus at 3 degrees Taurus, because that's also relevant. It's having a conversation with Jupiter at 2 degrees of Capricorn, and that's a trine. So I'm going to talk about that too in a minute. But getting back to what I was saying about Venus being sandwiched between Saturn and Pluto. So a lot can be said about this, and we only have a little bit of time. But in relation to the full moon, right, we talked about it being a culmination, a coming to fruition, coming to light, release point, a leveling up, all of these things. With Jupiter sandwiched, why do I keep wanting to say Jupiter? With Venus sandwiched there between Saturn and Pluto, this is surrounding matters of relationship, money, material resources, aesthetics, beauty, this kind of thing, okay? When I say relationship, don't think I'm just talking about boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, significant others. Relationship covers a lot of ground, right? When we're talking about relationship, it can be all kinds of relationships. So, but also money matters, things having to do with your material world, your material possessions and belongings. And so perhaps women in general. So this full moon energy, there is an element of that, most definitely. And there is what we call an inconjunct or a quincunx, which is a 150-degree angle between the full moon and all those planets stacked up in Capricorn. And this is like, you've heard me mention this conversation before, right? A quincunx or an inconjunct. It's like an itch you can't scratch. It's like when two people that don't have a lot in common are trying to work something out. And so this requires awareness and compromise to be able to get anything done so that you're not at a stalemate, right? So compromise is something to be mindful of, and it's probably going to be required of all of us in some way. One thing that I think that this energy can be really good for, Venus between Saturn and Pluto, is kind of like this mixing or intermingling of business with pleasure in some way, which is not always advisable. But under this energy, it could be beneficial. So, maybe being at some kind of work-related function, enjoying yourself, but having a more serious conversation that can lead to some gains down the road. Or that can lead to some aha moment, that kind of thing. But in general, I feel like this conversation between Saturn, Pluto, and Venus in this kind of awkward conversation with the full moon, it's karmic for sure, when Saturn's involved, when Pluto's involved. And it's asking us, how committed are we? How committed are we to what we want, to what we love, to who we love? How serious are we about those things? How are we using our time? Are we putting our time? Saturn's related to time as well. We're putting our time to good use. Again, this relates to what I was saying earlier in the video. Or are we kind of frivolously wasting our time on things that don't really matter, right? This can also bring up some power dynamics in relationships over money and resources, potentially. And it can bring about some kind of a transformation in relation to those things as well. And this can be a very positive thing, right? Like if you're already on solid footing, this can make that even better. It can allow, or it can allow you to see what needs to be let go of. And there may be a lot of communication and potentially mental chatter about these issues over this time. And on a practical level, could require some level of purging. For example, I know it's been like a nonstop purge fest at our house over these last couple of years, but most recently we've taken on this project of redoing a room and making some office space for my husband and doing redoing our sort of music room. And so there's been a lot of purging going on there, that kind of thing. So that is generally what's happening around the full moon. But there's one more piece I want to quickly mention to you before I dive into talking through each of the signs. So I mentioned that Uranus in Taurus is trining Jupiter in Capricorn. This can be an emphasis on liberation, on breaking free from restraints, right? Uranus in Taurus, Uranus is that energy of the liberator, the genius, right? So we can have these flashes of insight and aha moments around Uranus when Uranus is triggered. And Taurus is a sign that is an earth sign that has to do with our material world, our material possessions, our money, our security in that way. And then Jupiter, right? Planet of expansion and optimism and seeking wisdom and meaning in another earth sign, Capricorn, which has to do with material world as well, very much, and building something long-term. So it's like the way we can have this like electrifying energy around liberating ourselves from some way of dealing with our resources, of making our money, of our material possessions, of even when Capricorn's involved, tradition, responsibility, our careers, you know, kind of like who we are out in the world sort of thing. So that is also going on. And this can, you know, it can be breaking away from something that's been dragging us down or holding us back in some way. So that's a positive, right? And it's a positive conversation. So hopefully happens in an exciting, supportive way. Sometimes I will repeat this. I've been saying this a lot lately. Not all blessings seem like blessings. Initially, some blessings come in disguise. So if something does occur and at first you're thinking, crap, this is not good, sit with that for a while, right? Get all the information. And then perhaps begin to understand how it's really something that will be beneficial in the long run. Remember, it's how we respond to whatever life throws at us, right? It's always how we respond that really makes the difference. So enough about all of that. We're going to go through each of the signs and speak to where this full moon is happening for each of you, keeping in mind the context of everything that I've said in the intro and those cycles that I talked about, right? The last sort of decade, and then the last 6-month cycle since early June, and then the last sort of 2-week cycle that we've had from the new moon in Sagittarius. So what is culminating for you? What is being communicated? What are you thinking about? You know, what information is flowing in regards to what I'm about to speak to you about in terms of the houses. So again, rising sign, I always remind you of this. First and foremost, your rising sign, when we're talking about a general forecast like this, will tend to be the most obvious or accurate. And then your sun and moon sign as well will give you, will complete the picture. Okay, so beginning with Gemini, because Gemini, this is your full moon. So something is coming to pass, to fruition. There's a leveling up, perhaps. There's a release, a purging, a letting go of, an illumination regarding your first house of self. So the first house encompasses this notion of the self, the physical self, our physical body, our physical vitality, our physical appearance. Also, how we instinctually respond to the outside world and how we present ourselves to the outside world, how the outside world receives us, in the sense like what's the first impression that we make, or who do we appear to be, right? That kind of thing. And so with a full moon happening here in your first house, Gemini, this is a big culmination point around those matters. Thinking back to perhaps the last decade and what's gone on, you know, and then the last sort of 6 months since you had the new moon in your sign in early June, and what's transpired since then, what sort of began or came to, you know, what seeds were planted 6 months ago that are now sprouting, coming to fruition, perhaps needing harvesting in some way. So that's for you, Gemini. Moving on to Taurus now, where we've got the full moon happening in your second house of your material possessions, your money, your resources, your worth, right? Your self-worth, your values, what you value. And so for you, Taurus, there is some release point, purging, leveling up, coming to fruition, and culminating point surrounding these second house themes. And the cycle that's playing out here, you know, think about what began around the time of the new moon in Gemini, and then how that has evolved, and where are you at with that now in relation to these second house themes, okay? And what's going to happen next? What, again, culmination point, right? What's being illuminated for you right now? And so really, Taurus, I think that's enough info to go on, and you can for sure listen to the intro for all the rest of the details there. But second house is where the full moon's happening for you. That's where the light is being shone. Moving on to Aries, where we've got full moon happening in your third house, Aries. So your third house is all about your immediate environment, right? And the people and communications surrounding that. So siblings, cousins, peers, neighbors, people in your community. It's about messages exchanged back and forth, you know, the daily kind of information exchanges and that kind of thing, daily commutes or short, short jaunts, short trips. So something surrounding those themes sort of got off the ground around the time of the new moon in early June, and now it's reaching this next level. Right? This culmination point, this leveling up, this coming to fruition, a time of maybe releasing or purging something in this area as well that's run its course at this point. So, and maybe also related to what's transpired around the time of the new moon in Sagittarius a couple of weeks ago on a smaller scale. So think about that and those third house themes, and that's what's being lit up for you at the time of this full moon, Aries. Moving on to Pisces, where we've got the full moon happening in your fourth house of home and family and your emotional attachments and security. Has to do with your literal place of living, your foundations, your ancestry, your roots, and your lineage. Oftentimes the mother figure or mother figures, nurturing figures in your life. So this is what's being lit up for you around the time of the full moon, Pisces. And this is in relation to that bigger cycle where we've had a new moon in Gemini in early June, and some seeds were planted there or something began there that is now reaching this point of fruition and culmination, right? And so only you will know what specifically that is for you, but that's what's transpiring around this time. Keeping in mind all the pieces of the puzzle that I spoke about in the intro. Moving on to Aquarius, where we've got the full moon happening in your fifth house, Aquarius, which is your house of what sparks joy for you, right? What brings you pleasure, your creative self-expression, romance, children, and children that you are associated with. And so something began around the time of the new moon in Gemini, which was early June, and that is reaching a culmination point. Something's being illuminated, perhaps wanting to be purged. Something's run its natural course now at the time of the full moon. So only you will know what that is in your own personal life, but it is surrounding those fifth house themes for you, Aquarius. And you'll get more insight if you listen to the intro as well. Moving on to Capricorn, we've got the sixth house being lit up for you, Capricorn. So full moon in the sixth house of your daily affairs and the daily routines and all those tasks you do on the day-to-day to keep your ducks in a row, and keep things organized and running smoothly. And that includes your health and things surrounding health. And so Capricorn, something's been going on for you. Something perhaps transpired around the time of the new moon in early June, new moon in Gemini, specifically in this area of life that, where the seeds were planted or something was just getting off the ground or something just kind of came into your awareness. And it's now reaching a culmination point, a leveling up point, a coming to fruition, a something needing release, being let go of, reaching a natural conclusion at this point in that sixth house area. So that's for you, Capricorn. You'll get more details if you listen to the intro of this video, but sixth house is the focus for you. Moving on to Sagittarius, where we've got the full moon happening in your seventh house. So Sagittarius, this surrounds the themes of one-to-one relationships. So any close personal relationship that you have is seventh house. And something may have begun around the time of the new moon in Gemini 6 months ago, early June, that is now reaching a culmination point, or a leveling up, or a natural conclusion. It's time to purge, to release, or you're getting some kind of illumination or insight around this now at this full moon in Gemini. And so think about your one-to-one relationships and what has transpired in the last 6 months and where you're at with that now. And that will give you some insight, further insight. And what will give you even further insight is listening to the intro of this video, Sag, and then you'll get more details about the other things that are happening, excuse me, in relation to this full moon. We're moving on to Scorpio now, where we've got the full moon happening in your 8th house, Scorpio. So there's been a lot of deep work going on for you in this 8th house. Perhaps a lot of Gemini related work, which can be thinking, talking, communicating about learning, about something surrounding, 8th house matters, which are things like other people's resources. So taxes, debts, insurance, all of that kind of thing, inheritance. This also has to do with intimacy, right? And close, like very, very close, intimate connections. And those situations that you can feel vulnerable in has to do with psychological healing as well. So lots going on for you in relation to that, Scorpio. And whatever began around the time of the new moon in Gemini 6 months ago, around early June, is reaching a culmination point, a fruition, a natural ending, a time to purge, a leveling up in relation to those 8th house matters that I just spoke about. So that's for you, Scorpio. Moving on to Libra, where we've got the full moon happening in your 9th house. So Libra, for you, this has to do with higher learning, teaching, learning beyond the basics kind of thing. It has to do with what you learn from people who are different from you, foreign cultures. It has to do with maybe foreign travel, and it has to do with your worldview and your philosophies and belief systems. So something's been going on for you in that department since the new moon in Gemini in early June. And now it's reaching this point of natural conclusion or illumination or leveling up or purging or releasing, a culmination point, Scorpio or Libra, in relation to those 9th house things. So think about what that means for you, in relation to 9th house. And you'll know, you'll have a sense of what this means in your own personal life. So moving on to Virgo. Virgo, we've got the full moon happening in your 10th house, which is the most public area of the chart. So this is your public reputation and persona and who you are out in the world. It's about the legacy you wish to leave. It's about your relationship to authority and your own authority. Your career, ambitions, aspirations. So Virgo, that's what's being lit up for you around the time of this full moon. And that is in relation to something that began around the time of the new moon in Gemini in early June. So this cycle is now coming to a leveling up point, a point of culmination, natural release, purging, insight, all those new full moon words, right? So this can be a time potentially of you being in the spotlight, maybe, Virgo. But only you will know the specifics, right? And definitely listen to the introduction for all the details, Virgo, because I know you like all the details. So that's for you. And moving on to Leo now, where we've got the full moon happening in your 11th house of friendship groups, of networking, of groups, associations, clubs, of philanthropy in some ways, of people that are walking the same path as you, of benefactors. And so, Leo, something began in early June for you that is now reaching this point in the phase, right, where it's about the leveling up, the closure, the purging, the illumination, the coming to fruition or culmination around those 11th house themes. So, That's what's lit up for you over the time of this full moon, Leo. And then listen to the intro for all the other details, right? Last but not least, we have Cancer in this case, where Cancer, the full moon is happening in a private part of the chart for you in the 12th house. So it is lighting up that 12th house area. There is some purging, some release, some insight, intuition, some fruition or culmination around what goes on behind closed doors, around your subconscious, around loss, perhaps, around your spiritual connections, your connection to the other, the unseen, your dream world, your mental health, perhaps, as well. So also, the 12th house is also about institutions that we consider behind, are closed off from the world. So hospitals, hospices, rehabilitation facilities, prisons, spiritual retreat centers, all of these kinds of things are 12th house. So something that began for you around early June, around the time of the new moon, is now reaching this culmination point in relation to those 12th house matters. So that's for you, Cancer. Listen to the intro for the details, okay? Thank you, all 12 signs. And I'll be back next week to talk about the upcoming eclipse. And then I may take a break over Christmas, and I'll be back hopefully between Christmas and New Year's. But you'll see me next week for sure. So take good care and let me know about the microphone thing, okay? Talk soon. Bye-bye.